Received. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary, carried. Thank you very much. Now, item number 8, which is the monthly stuff from the Chief Executive and the Group Chief Financial Officer. Welcome, Phil, and welcome, Ross, to your first presentation as CFO. Hopefully you've got better numbers, and we're seeing an incredible improvement as a result of your taking the position. It's over to you, Phil, Ross, and Gary Blick is here to let us know what we all know is that things are not that good.
Thank you, Your Worship. Kia ora koutou councillors. I'll try and inject a little positivity into the year. Having run the gauntlet from derelict Point Chevalier down Meola Road this morning and feeling grateful for having made it to you. Not to be flippant, but I can promise you I'm not trying to minimise voter turnout in some devious way of overtaking decision making for the council. So, I'll start with welcome Ross in your new position, and Ross will talk obviously to the financials in more detail. But suffice to say, I'm pretty pleased with where we're at. 97% completion against the capital program, favourable by 11% in terms of OPEX, and favourable by 4% in terms of revenue. We're in a good position as we close in on the end of the financial year, and credit to the finance team, credit to the management generally in terms of landing that good position. In terms of government relations, key thing in the last month has been the legislation in relation to local water done well, and acknowledging the Mayor and Deputy Mayor and Megan for the submission, I think earlier this week, wasn't it, Your Worship? Yeah, so that concludes our input to the legislative process, and we await the result. The leadership refresh of the organisation is very well advanced, with executive team and general manager positions all now confirmed and in place from the beginning of this week. And I'll just, as an aside, after your recess, when you're back on deck, I would, and we will organise an opportunity, I think, just to have a bit of informal time with that new management structure and yourselves to do a little bit of relationship building in a less formal environment. If you're keen on that idea, I certainly am. Of course, fair to say, you don't finish one era and overnight have everything running perfectly smoothly, so we're just carefully managing the transition right now in terms of handover, and that includes potentially some tweaks in terms of lead officer roles on committees and so forth, and we'll be communicating further with you just to make sure that there's clarity for you and for all other elected members in the local boards in terms of who's who in the zoo and where you go for things going forward. So, but overall, pretty pleased to be at this point in terms of having that new structure in place. Looking outwards towards our community. And probably preface some of the figures I'll just talk to you now with by saying, I do appreciate the fact that access to our sort of free and low-cost services is probably going up in part because of the broader economic picture that our community is facing. But nevertheless, some quite interesting numbers. These are year-on-year shifts. Okay, 18% increase in the number of people using pools and leisure services. 17% increase in our library services. use of our library services, 21% increase in terms of the numbers of people accessing our regional parks. So I suppose just pausing to acknowledge that the reality for people working in those services is the numbers through the door are increasing quite significantly, and therefore there are operational impacts, but it's also evidence of, I think, the relevance of those and importance of those services to the community. A couple of other figures, a 30% year-on-year increase in terms of the number of electronic issues in the libraries. Okay, so that's testament to the shifts in consumer, if you like, behaviour and how people are accessing those services. So, and that's kind of replicated in a number of other areas, including a decrease in the number of people physically coming into some of our service centres in favour of online service options. Of course, we provide both. We've got to have sort of equitable access for everyone, and the facility for people for whom the digital option is not preferred or not available. But there is a significant trend in that direction that the organisation's coping with. I want to acknowledge a couple of staff members here and awards. Ian Godfrey, one of our senior building folk, appeared in the honours list recently as a member of the New Zealand Order of Merit. He's a very long-serving staff member and acknowledged for 50 years' contribution to life-saving in the broader region. Vahishta Patel has won the Future Skills Student of the Year Award for the Building Officials Institute. Waste Solutions has won a National Safeguard Award, so this is for health and safety management in the waste management space. They won the Innovation Award and then subsequently went on to win the WorkSafe New Zealand ACC Award for Best Overall Contribution to Improving Workplace Health and Safety in New Zealand. So, you know, kudos to that team and the work they've done in the health and safety space. Two final points, and then I'll hand over to Ross. I wanted you to be aware that consistent with your resolutions and having satisfied a number of conditions, I've signed the funding agreement in relation to the St James Theatre restoration. That required of us to be satisfied that the business case stacked up, that the release of the funds was contingent on the appropriate equivalent government contribution being made, and a number of other, if you like, safeguards in terms of that investment that you set out for me in terms of conditions. They've been satisfied. Acknowledge Councillor Lee's leadership of the group that's been looking at this, and staff, most particularly Noel Redden. So perhaps, but nevertheless consistent with the decision made by the governing body that I've now executed. And very finally, this is on a separate item on this agenda, so I won't labour the point. I just want to acknowledge the work done in the recovery area, and particularly that it is Matt Tucker's last meeting with us, and to acknowledge his contribution. Thank you, Your Worship.
Morning, everyone. Yes, this is my fourth day in the role. I haven't managed to transform the council's finances yet, but give me a little bit of time. I'll go through the numbers in a second, and there are a couple of little bright spots in terms of the May results. But before I do, just a couple of other broader updates on the agenda report. There's a note there about the Moody's rating methodology. So Moody's have worked through a new methodology. It's always a bit disconcerting when someone changes the rules of the game, but so pleased to advise that the outcome of that doesn't have any adverse consequences for Auckland Council's credit rating. It's still the AA2 and stable outlook, so it's a good outcome there for us. And the new methodology is a bit simpler and allows better comparison between local and central government entities in various countries. So it's a better, simpler kind of model and has no adverse impacts for us, which is great. One other broader update around the work with Kainga and the Ministry of Housing and Urban Development on the Auckland Housing Programme in the LTP. We had a final number in there is 620 million across the group, including water care, is what's included in the LTP with existing funding sources. There was an option that we looked at through the LTP to include more investment funded by the Housing Acceleration Fund for the bit of development contributions. We weren't able to include that in the final long-term plan because of a bit of uncertainty with government and decisions made through the budget. The budget there got a little bit of a haircut along with many other things in central government's budget, but there's been some fantastic progress, particularly over the last 2 to 3 weeks with officials across the council group, with Kainga and MHUD to work through what that package might look like, to how do we take advantage of, it's slightly smaller, maybe not as many neighbourhoods as quickly, but some really good progress to work through, and we're hoping that we'll be able to do more than what we had in the long-term plan. Just turning to the numbers, as the Chief Executive said, things have continued on. The trends that we've seen to date have sort of continued on through the May month across the group. 97% capital delivery, expenditure basically on budget across the group, less than a sort of 0.1% variance, so pretty much bang on in terms of controllable spend. On the revenue, things are looking pretty favourable, 4% revenue year to date, so over $100 million favourable on revenue across the year to date to the end of May. Within May, there's a couple of key highlights, both in the revenue space. So regulatory revenue was up 5 million above budget, and what we've seen there is new resource consent volumes have been the highest they've been since November 2022. And we've seen building consents have had the highest number of building consents come through this calendar year. So while there's kind of a broad property slowdown and overall things are not as great as they have been, we've seen quite a good, May was a pretty good solid month in terms of regulatory revenue. Also within it, despite high volumes in the resource consent space, the amount of discounts that have been given. So there's a process where if timeframes aren't met, discounts on fees have to be provided, and so for the year to date to May, that's less than half it was the prior year. So despite more volumes, things are happening faster and less of those discounts are having to be given. The other bright spot in terms of the May results and revenue was public transport revenue. So in 1st of May, we had the half-price fares roll off, we had train disruption, so you would kind of expect PT revenue to be down, but it wasn't. It ended up being 1 million favourable to budget despite all those challenges. And the reason for that is bus patronage was much stronger than expected. So we've seen strong bus patronage leading to strong revenues. So that is the updates for May. I'll pass across to Gary to talk about the economic outlook.
Thank you, Ross. Good morning, kia ora tātou. Activity remains subdued through this phase of the economic cycle as higher interest rates dampen consumption and investment from households and businesses. We can see this in the weak growth in GDP, which grew by just 0.2% the year to March, while falling on a per capita basis. In terms of new information over the last month or so, the Reserve Bank held the official cash rate at 5.5% at the end of May, as expected, and their updated forecast has inflation falling to 3% in the final quarter of this year. You may recall that it was at 4% in the first quarter of this year. So getting to 3% by the end of the year, it's slightly later than had been forecast. While monthly data shows signs of easing in food prices and rents, other parts of domestic inflation are proving a bit more persistent, taking longer to come down in areas such as insurance and perhaps local authority rates. So to ensure inflation falls, the banks signalled that the OCR is unlikely to move down from 5.5% before the end of the year, and so for Auckland households that means mortgage rates are likely to remain elevated for the rest of the year and possibly into early 2025. The signs of an increase in applications for resource consents and building consents mentioned by the CFO. That may indicate that the lead times to complete construction, given those lead times, applicants are looking through the near term to the latter part of next year when conditions are expected to improve. Just to end with some brighter news, the first results from the 2023 census were released at the end of May, and the counts for Auckland for the dwellings and population confirms that Auckland's had a strong growth in its housing stock, with an 11.9% increase in dwellings between 2018 to 23 over that 5-year period. That outstrips the growth in population of 5.4% over that period, even allowing for some of that pandemic-related population loss to be recovered. So that points to the benefits of the Auckland Unitary Plan in supporting the supply of housing, and there's a short article out today that summarises this in visual terms. Thank you, Ross.
Okay, thank you for that. Actually, I think you'll find that you might have had an increase in building consents, but building starts are dropping. They're two different things. So I'm hoping that the St James ones payment is related to building start rather than consents. Now, Councillor Sayers, Henderson, Simpson and Walker at the moment. Sayers, please.
Yeah, thank you. I've got a question for the CEO and then one for Gary. Oh, a couple, Phil, just on your verbal update there. I guess it's always important to ask, it's good to have a great update, by the way, and some really positive messages and news in that, so thank you for that. I guess it's always prudent to ask about the other side of the coin in terms of things that you need to flag to us with our governance hats on in terms of what you could see as potential risk items or projects that perhaps we should be tracking or keeping an eye on, Phil. So that's one question. And perhaps the other one I'll give to you as well is you mentioned about the good news about the council facilities being used more and more and the uptake there, which I agree is really good news. I guess it just makes, if you could comment about the pressures that's putting on in terms of resources and the financing required behind any of that. Have you got any comment around that or things you need to update us on? And related, I know you were talking about facilities. However, I often wonder about the compliance teams in terms of added pressure coming on to compliance as well. So if you'd like to make any comment around how you think compliance is tracking in terms of the resource levels. And then I've got a second question for Gary. Thanks, Phil.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. Look, I'll probably be quite basic in this forum, but I'm happy to share something a little bit deeper, perhaps at the next Performance and Appointments Committee when I talk more broadly about how things are going and the performance of things. To be honest, I'm not seriously worried about much at the moment. Some of the things on my mind, though, are, the recovery team. We're going to talk about this later. The recovery team's under significant pressure. We're still in that really difficult situation where we haven't resolved matters for quite significant numbers of people in the community. It's not for want of effort and resources, really. It's just the simple, it's the complexity and difficulty of that work, getting through the categorisations and dealing with matters in that space. So that's pretty front of mind, I'd have to say. We're dealing with, still in that space, we're dealing with quite a number of situations where people have challenged aspects of our decision making to totally appropriate. There's a process for that, but we're dealing with those by way of, if you like, appeals on decisions made. So that's on my mind. We've got to land the pools and leisure review situation. Clearly, as I evidenced, that's a space where workloads are increasing, if you like, through increased usage. And it's also an area that we've got to monitor quite carefully because there are safety issues clearly with in pools, particularly in terms of lifeguard ratios. We have had situations where we've had to limit people's access to facilities because we don't have adequate staffing numbers there to deal with volumes from a safety point of view. It's a very practical, bit of evidence around. But we don't have, at the moment, we're coping pretty well in that space. I will certainly come back to you and tell you if we need additional staffing resources, but I don't believe that would even need to be a budget issue at this point in time, right? It may affect staffing numbers, but we're actually managing the staffing budget quite tightly, and there is a bit of room to move in that space. Compliance-wise, it is still of some concern. We've talked previously about animal management, dog numbers in the region. That continues to be a focus, although, I gratefully received support from you to increase numbers, and Craig Hobbs and the team did a great job to respond to that. So there's quite a bit of not quite a bit of increased capacity. There is some increased capacity and some quite proactive work happening to try and get on top of some of those issues in terms of animal control. Look, aside from that, I'd have to say I think things are going pretty well, and that's the sense I want to leave you with.
Thanks, Phil. And Gary, my question is around even though there's been some modest growth, you mentioned per capita was different kind of take on that. So I'm just, are you able to interpret that for me in terms of what does that mean for a ratepayer day to day? Obviously, we're doing some modest rate increases, and we've also upped our increased the fees and levies. I was wondering about people's ability to pay. I guess that's good. So are you able to framework just what that means in reality for the layperson or ratepayer and citizens of Auckland?
Thank you, Councillor. Through the Chair, just comment. Comment I made was about, output for the economy, which is measured using GDP, and then thinking about the population growth we've had. I guess that output has sort of been growing quite weakly, quite slowly, and then we've had a lot of population increase. So the output per person has probably fallen. In terms of what you then mentioned regarding ratepayers' ability to pay, I would say that over this period, people who've remained in employment have had reasonably strong growth on average in terms of incomes. And while we have seen some uptick in the number of households falling into mortgage arrears, is quite small as a proportion. It's higher than it has been, but not as high as if we go back to the GFC period. So what I would really say is that those who've retained employment, yes, they are feeling cost of living, they're feeling higher interest rates, but they should be able to manage their situation given that they've been stress tested when they took on mortgages. It's those that are falling into perhaps hard times through perhaps unemployment. That's where some of the mortgage arrears pressures coming on. So hopefully, Councillor, that gives you some context. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Councillor Henderson, please.
Thank you. 3 questions. So the first 2 to our Chief Economist. In terms of census data recently coming out for housing, can I just confirm how many homes have been built in Auckland since 2018?
Thank you, Councillor. Through the Chair, the number is 64,800. That's in the 5 years, 2018 to 2023. That's a count of dwellings through the census. On a monitoring basis, we look at consents issued and then the completions of those consents as our sort of preferred measure, but the census gives us an insight into the stock of dwellings, shall we say.
That's fantastic. And a follow-up, how many of those have built outside the Auckland Isthmus?
Councillor, through the Chair, we can look at the count in dwellings on a local board basis, and we can see, I guess, if you look at the local boards that are part of the Auckland Isthmus, there's 6 of them. I think that the remainder outside the Auckland Isthmus probably account for 74 or 3/4 of the homes that are counted through the census that are additional are outside of the Auckland Isthmus.
Awesome, thank you. I really appreciate that. Last question for the CEO. Can you please talk us through implementation of the living wage and our pathway to being an accredited employer?
Thank you, Councillor. So I'll try and keep this reasonably simple. So the core council organisation is essentially already there in terms of living wage implementation. The challenge lies in the area of our key contractors, and I've just done some assessment work on that, and what we've identified is that for the most part, the bulk of our contractors are also have arrangements consistent with living wage objectives. There are some areas that to get there would require some additional raising of folk at the bottom end, frankly, of their wage structures. So there is a question with me right now in terms of whether council seeks full accreditation, which would require, if not us to close that gap, then certainly for us to have a plan to close that gap. I need to bring back to you a robust assessment of what the costs of that would be in order that we can kind of jointly consider it. But that's my intention to do that shortly, actually.
Thank you for your progress. That's great. Look, I mean, just this might be for the Mayor, or it might be for yourself, but I believe we probably should reconstitute the Living Wage Advisory Group. That did a great job last term, and we should start it again this term to look at those details and those situations. So thanks, Mayor.
Deputy Mayor, please.
It's okay. Councillor Sayers answered my questions.
Councillor Walker, please.
Sure. A couple of questions, well, a few. The numbers in respect of participation, library, leisure centres and the like, that's really great. You know, maybe looking at 20% average. How are we coping in terms of staff numbers to support that additional demand?
I think we're coping pretty well. As I indicated in answer to a previous question, there are some particular sensitivities in the pools and leisure space in terms of required ratios of staffing numbers to customer numbers. You know, we're talking about effectively drowning risk in pools and what have you needing to be appropriately managed. In other respects, we're doing okay, and it's been monitored carefully. I have a little bit of freeboard in terms of the FTE, you know, staffing level allowance that has previously been agreed with you. So we're in a good space.
The other question I've got just goes further to the presentation by Lisa Prager earlier, and also a range of concerns that have been raised by councillors. So in a situation where the centre of the city has lost its mojo, there is significant vacant space, there are any number of issues, social issues and other issues. I dare say retail trade is a problem. A couple of things come to mind. One, it would be useful to have some reporting around that. So the report that we received communicates a great deal of information about Auckland Council, but very little about Auckland and the health of Auckland. And particularly given the dire state of our jewel, which is the centre of the city, I'd suggest we need to have that information, and those sorts of figures are available. They're not hard to find. The follow-on question that I've got is, given that dire state, can we put in place a campaign, a full-on campaign that embraces all of council as it goes to reactivating the centre city? The reason I say all of council is we have a huge stake. We own significant assets. The art gallery, the museum, the town hall, the Aotea Centre, the list goes on. We employ huge numbers of staff in the central city. There's Auckland Transport, there's Eki Panuku, there's Auckland Unlimited. There are the relationships we have with Heart of the City and the like. So where are we at in terms of turning the centre city around? I would suggest that if we went out and got some advice, there would be many things that we would be told as to how to do that. And this is urgent because people are losing their jobs, shops are closing. Where is the strategy to approach Smith & Coe and turn their decision around, if at all possible? Because that is an absolute jewel in the crown. So I don't know where we're at around that, Phil, but I would suggest that there would be huge support around this table to that effect, and also on the part of local boards. And that's just the centre city, let alone the rest of Auckland, where there are also locations that are suffering, and you could say that they've lost their mojo as well. Thank you.
We can, just in response to the question, we can certainly share with you what we can in terms of the numbers, you know, what is happening in terms of retail sales activity in the CBD. So that's a good starting point. Take that signal from you, councillor. And I'm really happy to provide some broader advice to you. I just put on record that it would be wrong to leave you with the impression that nothing was happening in this space. Clearly, there's been a particular focus on city centre safety, increased activity, financial contributions from the Mayor's office, a lot of liaison with police and others. So please don't be left with the impression that there's nothing happening that makes a contribution towards some of the underlying factors here, but we can give you broader advice. I do make the point that through targeted rate funding, clearly, there is a significant contribution through Heart of the City, and a level of responsibility for some of what you're indicating sits there.
So just further to that, can we see, and can the people of Auckland see, evidence of a joined-up approach that deals with the urgency of this and the magnitude? As an example, if there's a large retail operation like the big malls and the like, they have marketing strategies, they've got event strategies, all of their participant retailers alike are tapped into, so everybody's promoting, and it works. We have a huge stake in Auckland and the CBD. If public transport revenue goes up, there's a positive feedback loop. It can build on itself. Just relying on cruise ships and so on, and this notion of the CRL in a couple of years to deliver is not dealing with the urgency. So I would like to see a plan. I think Aucklanders want to see a plan. It could be done collaboratively. It's not just us. It's all of Auckland. Thank you.
I'm sorry, Your Worship. I'll just make one final point. Yes, we can provide that advice. There is a stream of advice coming to Councillor Hill's PEP committee around aspects of this. We'll do more. There's also the role of Tātaki, which has economic development as part of its brief, although, I'd have to acknowledge that we have made decisions that limit the amount of resourcing they have to do some of this, but we'll get the advice for you. Sorry, Your Worship.
I think what you're saying there, Councillor Walker's got some merit. We have an economist. I hope that next month you actually give us the retail figures across certain areas and sectors are available. I get it in the business association I'm in. I think you're going to find that, in fact, the CBD is doing no worse than quite a lot of our suburban areas and other areas. There's a competition between parts of Auckland. And I'm the mayor of all of Auckland, from Warkworth to Wilsford to Pukekohe. And in times of like this, you'll probably find that the higher spending areas drop quicker than the lower spending areas, because their spend is more in keeping, and you'll probably find the drop in St Heliers shopping is more than it is in Otahu. But I'd like to have that to be compared. And then when you look at Queen Street and the CBD, K Road's gone down because of really Ministry of Housing and Urban Development buying a hotel and sticking 501s in there and making a crime centre. It's had nothing to do with the economy, it's just dumb stuff. The CBD, it'd be interesting to have how it's going at, we could compare Commercial Bay with the upper end of Queen Street, where it's been held back because we all got, or rather you all got tangled up with keeping the St James's a wreck for all those years. And I still don't believe it's going to be fixed, even we're going to make a $15 million bonfire of money onto that. So perhaps we can have something across the district to show those things, because you might find it's not just the CBD. You might find there's worse areas that need more help. Papatoeto's had a bigger sudden rise in crime than Queen Street as a comparator of them in terms of the number of shops there compared to the number of had crime. So a good cross-section, a look across the whole area is a good idea in case we rush and throw more money into the CBD to find the problem somewhere else. The CBDs all over the world are competing with regional shopping complexes. Westgate is now a huge competitor for the city. So is Newmarket and other large ones further out, Sylvia Park. So I think I'm going to ask the economist to devote some of us next month to have a, rather than just blurting out national figures which we can read, to get a good picture of what's happening across our city, which areas are doing above and below. If the city's just doing the same as the rest of the economy, that's not surprising when we have already heard today that GDP per person is dropping. So and you'll find that the politicians in Wellington will talk about the growth in GDP, but GDP per person is a very bad thing to be going down. So I think we will take seriously what you raised there, Councillor Walker, and next month...
Through you, Mr Chair, while I appreciate that there are issues all around Auckland, I would suggest if we can just focus as a start with the central city.
On the rest of Auckland, to be honest.
Okay, well,
I think we've got to have a comparative to see. As the person who lives in the city, I still think we need to have a good look at what's going across the region. What are the trends? Because we're not alone in being a CBD that is struggling.
By the time we've got another report around trends, more shops and the like will have gone.
I think Gary has something to contribute to this discussion, if that's okay.
I just acknowledge the question. I think it's a good one, and through the chair, commit to bringing you an update at the next governing body that focuses on the city centre with a comparison with other parts of Auckland. We're also preparing a short insights paper. It was really for the city centre advisory group as part of the reporting on the targeted rate that looks at things like vacancy rates, retail sales, consenting activity, pedestrian counts. So we can package that up and make that available.
Yeah, that's a very good idea. There's nothing like having the real data before we rush off and spend money in various things. But that's very well raised, and it'll be responded to in a professional manner. Thank you very much. Councillor Turner.
I just wanted to say, Mr Mayor, on what you were saying there, places like Gleneden, other places in Auckland, the first presenter I took from her comments that it's the grey infrastructure changes which are having the most detrimental effect, and that's certainly what I think the people I represent in West Auckland would agree to. So that was just on that comment, and I think that's the commonality across the city. And my second comment is to staff and CEO. I heard your comment about, in my naivety, I didn't see the first presenter as maybe being derogatory to you, and that is not my intent. My intent is to work on systemic problems with everybody. Thanks.
Sure, it wasn't taken in that context at all. Councillor Leone.
Kia ora, just a couple of very quick questions. First of all, just a question to our CE around, I've had some comments from new staff that have joined recently around work placements. I know there's probably another formal name for it, but I just wanted to get an indication from you how many we've got, or have we got a plan around getting more work placements involved at the moment?
Might need to just clarify what you mean by that, councillor, in terms of workplace.
Work placement, is that a hiring?
Oh. So not employees, but people here for work experience type reasons, is that what you mean?
Yes, work experience and both hiring.
I think I won't sort of answer the question on the fly. I'll come back to you if that's okay with some figures. We've got a number of, we've increased the graduate program, we've increased the intern program, and it's a moving feast because we're on a trajectory to have a significantly increased number of people, 50 by mid-year in the next intake, for example. Oh, God.
That's an alarm to show that he's told a lie. No, it's not true.
That's
Thank
the
you for that
most
question.
important boss I've got.
Councillor Lee, your question?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I think just in support of Councillor Walker's idea or proposal, which should be taken very seriously, I think you're quite right to identify the global trends, not just citywide but global, in terms of what is impacting on our, what was called, but not officially anymore, the CBD. However, I think Queen Street and the environs are quite a serious example, almost an aberration of, which is a worse than the trend. In other words, so why is Queen Street worse off than other main centres around the world, around the country, and especially in Australia? It seems, I believe, that council itself needs to be asking hard questions of our approach to it, which, and excuse me, as a politician I can say this, is overly political and ideological even, and in effect what we are doing with well-meaning intentions is blockading the central city, and that may reduce emissions, but I kind of doubt it if you really measured it scientifically, given the prolonged construction. But that is damaging retail severely. And the Smith & Co closure, or pending closure, is a kind of a symbol of a wider malaise that we really have to ask questions about our own strategy. We have the City Centre Advisory Group and the City Centre Targeted Rate. I have to tell you, Mr. Mayor, that is doing more harm than good. The City Centre Targeted Rate should be benefiting the central city, and I don't believe it is. And part of the problem is that the advisory panel is made up of people who actually don't, by and large, you don't pay or not accountable for the targeted rate. So my question is to you, while I agree with your pointing out the global trend, I do believe that we ourselves have to question our own strategic approach. The City Centre Master Plan, despite what its stated goals, is actually working to achieve the opposite. And so my question is, would you be willing to have a look again at the City Centre Master Plan and the way the council and AT and Pānuku is interpreting it?
I think that's an important thing to do. I agree that it's time to have a look at the City Centre Master Plan. It was another one of those ones that came from a heroic period of time when we launched into electric ferries as well, which would be another one of the great lemons of the past. So I accept that, and I accept that Councillor Walker has started this, and we'll follow and we'll get some accurate information, and we'll have another look at the City Centre Master Plan and see whether or not. We also have to understand that COVID and the internet have had huge impacts on city centre trade all over the world. People like to not work from home as opposed to not working at work, and the internet you know, hands up who's not buying stuff off the internet, which used to get out of a shop. Not many people would say they're not guilty of that. And so those are two big trends. So we've now, as a result of Walker and Lee, and Gary Blick, we'll have a bit of a good look at that next time we meet. Is that all right? I think we'll move on. Thank you very much for that. You two can leave in the table and we'll have any more comments if we haven't got any more comments, because some of those comments sounded like questions and vice versa. Councillor Dalton has got one.
Yeah, I do a comment. Yeah, thank you. Actually, it was well, thank you for your presentation, Phil, and to our finance team. Really, I was just going to respond to what you were saying about the wider Auckland region, because it is true that out in the suburbs we are seeing the investment in the city centre out of the mayoral budget and other budgets, and wondering, you know, where's this equity here? So appreciate the challenges that the city centre is facing, but we are all facing the same changes. Now, in my area, Manurewa and Clendon in particular have been really resilient economically, so the numbers are pretty good. People are shopping locally, it's good, but we are seeing the increase in crime as we saw in Papatoetoe last week. Different crime, violent crime, young crime, youth crime. And so these challenges do perpetuate throughout the region, so thank you for calling for that regional response. Just a quick comment on the City Centre Master Plan. Since I've come into the role as Iki Panuku lead councillor, I meet regularly with the City Centre residents group, and they're reasonably comfortable, I think.
Mayor,
Please, any
for
more of
Gail
that
to
and
call
you'll
out
be
people are a pack of idiots in our meeting, Gail's continuously calling out nasty things, and I don't think that's appropriate.
One more of those, Gail, and you're out.
They seem to be quite pragmatic from my perspective. I haven't been to the advisory group. I can see who's on the advisory group and I can sort of work out who is paying the rates, right? The implementation has been a bit of a challenge. So the relationship between when we made Iki Panuku the lead for the city centre master plan implementation, and that coordination with Auckland Transport has been a challenge, but they're working through it. And I think, and we've had other unbudgeted projects come in too that are affecting the city centre master plan being implemented. We've had a review of this plan before. I mean, let's bring it back if you want to bring it back and have another look at it, but it's tracking as well as it can, considering the things I've mentioned and also what you mentioned, COVID, which just stalled so many of our projects and blew them out of the water. So I'd just like to take a pragmatic approach about that and not just kick it up in the air because of some loud voices. Thank you
very much. I think an evidence-based review of it, just not so much to look at the city centre as being wrong, it's just looking, is the city centre master plan current with the changed circumstances due to the global trends, so lower retail spend generally, COVID impact on not people coming in all the week, plus other impacts. Is it still relevant? Everything should be reviewed. When circumstances change, we should look at things.
I think that's the other point I wanted to make, because we're getting presentations from Auckland Transport was one of them, always comparing their numbers to pre-COVID, always. And the question I always ask is, when are we going to stop doing that? That's not a relevant measure when we know how many people are working from home by choice. So our numbers need to change to reflect the world we live in today, not the world we were living in pre-COVID, or even before that in the 1970s. Thank you.
Councillor Henderson.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor. Just about town centres as well, and a little bit about some of the public service data that the CEO has shared with us. Yeah, look, just in terms of town centres, I want to thank you for alerting the room to the plight of, you know, town centres across suburban Auckland as well as the city centre. We're all needing a bit of help, and things are tough for a lot of places. But look, I do also just want to remind everyone here that, you know, we're public figures and we're public leaders. I think that we should be involved heavily in promoting the areas that we represent and elsewhere, and championing these places as leaders in the community. You know, we do need to be realistic. I'm not saying that, but it also just urges us. We've got to reset our messaging with the public and actually be visionary leaders. We talk way too much about the problems sometimes. We tell everybody how bad places are, and then we wonder why people don't want to experience them.
That's right.
Right. You know, newsflash, we represent one of the greatest cities in the world. We've got fantastic businesses, we've got fantastic public services, parks, events, all the rest of it. Let's talk about these things a little more, I would suggest. And speaking of public services, I want to just raise this because I don't want us to lose this. Pool use is up 18% this year, library use is up 17%, park use is up 21%. I said in the previous debate of the LTP, and I've been excited to get these figures, services to the community have to be supported around this table. And, you know, we shouldn't be cutting and slashing and having this negative rhetoric in a cost of living crisis and an economic downturn. The fact is the council is contributing to fantastic services and fantastic spaces. Let's celebrate it. Thanks, Mayor.
Very well done. Thank you very much. And on behalf of Voter Who, you can get your shirt cheaper out there. So, Councillor Hill.
Thank you. And Councillor Henderson basically stole what I was going to say a bit. But you know, like, we don't have to pretend things are rosy, but we also don't have to pretend everything is bad. And often I sit here at this very item, Phil reads out a bunch of things that we should be celebrating or looking at and the challenges, and then we sit here and go, everything sucks, everything's bad, this place is corrupt. There are elected members in this city who've been around for 30 years and still blame everyone else. So the thing that I get frustrated at is that we go and tell people, don't come to the city centre, it's crime-ridden, it's terrible, there's no shops open, it's terrible. And then we go, why is no one coming to the city centre? Councillor Lee, Councillor Lee, you actually don't turn up to half the city centre votes. I can put that up there. So, Councillor Lee, I never talk over you, and you might have been in. No, I haven't. And if you might have been elected. No, Mayor, you've let a bunch of weird stuff happen today. I'm having my moment to speak. Right, the city centre last year, the figures from Heart of the City and others show GDP was up 3 times what the rest of New Zealand was in the city centre. There is also, the March results come out from Heart of the City saying $5 billion worth of investment, and that's just the top 10 projects happening in the city centre right now. Precinct just announced a couple of weeks ago they've finally bought the McDonald's site, which has been sitting derelict, disappointingly, and they're investing a couple $100 million into that as well. Commercial Bay, Britomart, if you go down there and I get off the bus down there, is bustling at all times. The city centre, yes, at the moment has moved to the waterfront, to Britomart, to the Wynyard Quarter, to Commercial Bay, all the places that this council has been investing in through the city centre master plan. We haven't been doing, we can't, you know, get kudos for all of it, but all the places we've been doing huge public sector ratepayer investment, and if you look at the City Centre Advisory Board, a lot of those people do pay the rates, and they all sit there and decide what is best for the city, for people and for the businesses, and most of the investment is coming from that city centre targeted rate. It isn't coming from the rest of the city. So while there are massive problems, the Mayor and others are trying to address them, Josephine, through the crime prevention, through positive ways, with community, also putting extra police on the ground, the government are acting. There is a bunch of things to address crippling issues that every city centre is facing around the world since COVID. We've also had storms and everything else. So I think the important thing we could do, you know, we took $45 million off our economic development and events agency last year and then expect them to go and do all the events. Well, actually, there aren't Pinks and Rugby World Cups and Football World Cups coming because we're not investing. We're not giving Tātaki almost any money to go and scout for those big events. Why? Because we sit around here and say, well, that was too expensive to go spend a couple $1 million. Why? New South Wales, Victoria, all those big cities are spending mega bucks to get huge events and tourism outcomes. So we just need to be careful with our decisions, how they affect. And yes, we can deal with the problems, but I personally won't be bagging the city centre at every opportunity and then expecting people would turn up. Thank you.
Very much for that. That's a good speech in favour of the the bed tax which is coming. Lottie Foley, or Lotu Foley, I'm sorry, are you out there, Lotu Foley?
Yes, kia ora. Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you everybody for your kōrero. Thank you to the CE and the finance team as well. Look, I wanted to add a positive spin as well on the state of our city, and I do want to say that, look, I'm really happy to hear that public transport, although we're having issues with the trains, but the bus use is going up, and that unexpected extra revenue from that, that's a good news story that we should be happy about as well. I do want to commend our staff in our different facilities, including our libraries, our pools, our community centres. To me, it's not a surprise that there's an increase in use there, because over the last couple of terms, at least definitely in my ward, we have increased investment working alongside our local boards to make sure that there's more activity going on in our public civic spaces, like our libraries and our community centres. If you look around at the different matariki events, every area
Righto, well, we're having a few moments of silence in memory of Councillor Lotu Foley, to be followed by Councillor Sayers, please.
Thank you, Worship. I guess my comment is just around, it's a comment because I don't know the answer to it, but I just want to put it in the ether out there for the chief executives of the CCOs and perhaps Auckland Council to consider, and that's, when we do these projects, City Rail Link's a great example. There's others in Warkworth. There's a water main, sewage main planned to go down the main street. Those businesses, it's the council's projects that are impacting those businesses. Those businesses have no say over it. And yet, we say, in a few years, you'll be better off. The value of your property's gone up, which is probably owned by the landlord, not the business owner. You'll get more turnover, but it's too late. They've gone out of business by then. So it's around that compensation question. Here they are operating. Suddenly we come along and we want to do something down a street or something similar that impacts their businesses directly at no fault of their own. And that not only do they go out of business and services are lost to communities, their families don't have an income, employees don't have an income, mental stress pressures come on. The ripple effect is wider than just that immediate business. So my comment is we need to be, I'm not saying that we stop progress, we're able to find solutions that don't impact them, but when we have no other option but to impact people's businesses, is there another way, another model, some way of helping support them financially through that exercise? Thank you, Your Worship.
I don't think we're here to guarantee people's businesses. I mean, things change. And someone's failure is another one's opportunity. And somebody will manage it and somebody doesn't. I mean, I went up there and listened to those guys, and there was a point about that, but then again, I went up there on King's birthday and they're all shut. So, give me a break. The world's not safe out there. It's not our job to make it safe. But thank you for that comment, and Councillor Newman will have the last comment, and then we'll have a cup of tea before we all nod off.
Yeah, I don't wish to put myself between you and your cup of tea, but look, I think that there are probably a myriad of reasons why people's shopping behaviour has changed, and certainly online and the convenience of the suburban mall has been something that's been very attractive to people for many years now, but it is, of course, it's confronting for Main Street. But I do think, I have to say, Your Worship, I think two things that would be really, really good for economic activity in Auckland. One will be, as the tax cuts roll through, I think that's good for people to have a bit of extra money for discretionary spending. I think that improvements to visas to support talent searches, as well as hopefully a recovery in tertiary education, I think would be really, really important. There's two things for me that are critical for council. One is that there is a real focus on the renewals program, because renewals are not things that necessarily have to go through a bevy of consenting. That is about just getting on with business as usual, because men and women out there doing the renewals work is men and women who are earning their bread, and I think that's good for the convenience of our community. And the other thing this council can do is to not work against the work that is taking place in central government and with the Reserve Bank to reduce inflationary pressure. I think that inflation is the biggest problem facing productivity and business confidence at the moment, and to get it down under between 0 and 3% is critically important. And what could we do? Well, we could pass a balanced budget with the lowest possible rate that we can strike. So that's a good reason to pass the budget today. Thanks.
Thank you for that. And I think we'll have an adjournment for 10 minutes. But we'll I'll move, and the Deputy Mayor will second that we receive the information from the CEO and the new CFO, and look forward to a fuller information from the council economist next month. All those in favour, please say aye. To the contrary, we'll adjourn until right on 12. We're taking our time today. I hope you've all brought your sleeping bag.